Hi, and welcome to Deep Dialogues, 12 extraordinary conversations I'm having with amazing female soul stewards who at this time are transmitting their unconditional love, empathy, and compassion about the creation of a new level of living, and therefore helping us to form ideas about a brave new world that we can create together. Have a wonderful time listening in. So, Christiane, I want to say a very, very warm welcome to these deep dialogues in series. And my darling, you are number 6.
Yay.
There will be 12 in all. And so I consider that to be rather remarkable because number 6, as we know in ancient numerology, is the substance of the balance between the lovers, the balance between the conscious and the unconscious. And here you are in this field of inimitable expertise, where you're balancing the old and the new. And by that I mean, of course, as you well aware, allopathic and vibrational, and the vibrational, or if you like, the world of science, the head post-Newton, and moving into the celebration of holism through the body and therefore through our emotions and through into the incandescence of the metaphysical. So thank you for being here. It's I'm so proud that you're here. It's so wonderful that you're visiting this particular platform, because I'm intending that this will be a very productive and developmental situation for really genuine, deep dialogues to take place, where the superficie is something that we merely describe in passing and then go deep into the causation, because it seems to me, I know we touched on it the other day when we spoke, but this is quintessential at this time, rather than, you know, the frolicking or the mental gymnastics of all the ego process that we're seeing in the world, and often the very, very deep reserves of our consciousness are just not being tapped. So I hope I can invite you back. And I just want to say a warm welcome to all the wonderful people who are checking in here. I can see familiar names and not so familiar names, so warm welcome to you. And our wonderful Dr. Christiane Northrup, I'm going to introduce formally to you, and then she and I will just launch into a wonderful dance. Now, Christiane is actually a tango specialist. And I love that, the fact that you have that creative outpouring. So we're going to dance the tango.
Yes, let's do that. Yes.
I believe that most people know exactly who you are, but of course I want to formalize the introduction. So Dr. Christiane Northrup, who started as an obstetrician and gynecological physician, but then became a New York Times bestseller and a pioneering visionary in the field of what we can put right, or what will be right, with the female body. And of course, Christiane has become a leading authority of how the experience of behavior and the science of medicine can create unity for the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual bodies so that we function optimally. And in 2020, this year, Christiane was included in the Watkin Books Spiritual 100 list of those living people. I love this fact, it's living people who make a unique spiritual contribution to the world. And of course, as we know, Christiane has written so many wonderful books, and has appeared on innumerable occasions on TV, particularly with the Oprah Winfrey Show. And of course, I will include Christiane's website in all of the detailing later. So warm welcome. How did you become a medic? I mean, in the sense of when did you choose that path?
I chose that path, I'm certain before birth, but I didn't know it until after college. I was a biology major. I liked life. I liked the study of life, but I also wanted to go to a college where I could continue to take harp lessons with my harp teacher, Alice Shalafu of the Cleveland Orchestra. And I spent summers in Camden, Maine on the coast practicing the harp. So I went to Case Western Reserve in Cleveland, majored in biology, finished. And then I thought I would become a biology teacher. And I called my advisor, and he said, "Oh, that's like a thoroughbred running a junk horse race. Why don't you go to medical school?" I had an aunt and an uncle, both doctors, my dad's brother and sister. I hated their lifestyle. They had left Thanksgiving and Christmas to go. They always left early. And my dad, they made fun of. He was a dentist. But then, I realized I went to Europe with my sister, painted houses to earn the money, and then decided, okay, I'll go to medical school. It's a better degree. An MD is a better degree at that time than a PhD. And I never intended to practice. And then I saw a baby born. I went to Dartmouth Medical School. I saw a baby born, and it's one of those moments of pain-filled joy, joy-filled pain. I thought that I would fall to the ground with how moved I was by it. And then, there were not that many women in medicine, so you did not want to appear as though you were going to lose it and weep. And so I was glad I had a mask on at the time. And then that was kind of it. I interviewed 12 places in family medicine, but ultimately went into OBGYN. It felt as easy as breathing. It was as though I was born to attend birth of every kind. I realize now I feel like I'm a midwife as we birth this new earth.
Yes, you mentioned it the other day, and it was interesting because somebody was asking, well, I know Christiane's written a lot of books, but what is she? And I actually said, well, she's a soul midwife.
Yes, thank you.
Before I actually appreciated the entire significance of what you've just shared and that appellation, because evidently you are invested with this soulful experience of bringing us to account in a very gentle and gracious way on that level as a soul midwife. So how wonderful, how absolutely wonderful. And the co-creativity between allopathic medicine and vibrational medicine, this came through a natural organic growth, or did you experience light on the road to Damascus, or what happened?
I grew up in a family where I had a couple of siblings, one who died at 6 months old. My mother was given big doses of antibiotic, streptomycin, that probably damaged the baby. She died at the age of 6 months old. I had named her Bonnie Laurie. And then my brother was born. After that, he wouldn't eat. My parents were told he was mentally defective. They signed him out of the hospital against medical advice and fed him every hour on the hour with a tube. My mother was, they were told all kinds of things. Now, remember, we had a medical family with my dad's brother and sister, both medical doctors, but we couldn't find the answer. Finally, he was taken to a woman doctor at Women's Medical, which no longer exists. She was a pediatric endoscopist. She put down the fiber optic scope and said his esophagus was so eroded that if they didn't remove the tube, he would perforate his esophagus and die. And she had good clinical skills. And she said, let's take out the tube and see what happens. And after 3 days, he started to eat. He was a year old, weighed 10 pounds, and is fine today. He has some immune stuff, like a little rheumatoid factor, a little bit of fibrosis of the lungs from that early immune damage. However, he's fine. And then when I was interviewing in medical school, my dad got chest pain, and my mother sent him to the CCU, Buffalo General, and they were told he had a heart attack. And 3 days later, he calls her up. He says, Edna, come and get me. They don't know what's going on. He walked out of the CCU with the chest leads flying and the nurses yelling. And when I got back from my tour of medical schools, he was sitting up in a chair with fluid 2/3 of the way up in his lung fields, reading The Godfather by Mario Puzo, and he healed well at home. And indeed, they were correct. They didn't know what it was. It had been infectious pericarditis. So I was radicalized long before I went to med school. Plus, when I was 12, I was babysitting for a couple, and they had a box had come in the mail, and the thing on the box said Natives of Eternity. And though I was a very good girl, I opened their mail because I was obsessed. I needed to see the book. And it was written by Flower Newhouse, a Christian mystic. And it was about her ministry in Escondido, California, the Christ Word Ministry, and it was all of the angels of birth, the angels of death, the divas of the wind. And I remember being so excited. Oh my, what I really always hoped was the truth was in fact the truth. And so I used to meet with this woman, Gretchen Carroll, and she'd make me brunch and we would discuss all things metaphysical all through my adolescence and so on. So I went to medical school, first of all, wondering why doctors don't tell you the truth, why they don't talk to you. And then I saw a baby born and that was it. But I always knew, I read all of Edgar Cayce when I was a kid. And so I always knew that there was more stuff and past lives. And I read Joan Grant, all of her novels from past lives, Winged Pharaoh, and all. So I just thought I'd bring it all together, you know? And so I always knew that there was way more going on, you know, and instead of just the Newtonian part. And so that's how that all happened.
Wow, wow, how beautiful. And so it did also have a tenor that was a very natural, organic process of your soul unraveling in the early chronology of your existence.
That's right.
And then,
yes.
and I guess, you know, the marker of desperation comes along in the sense of profound sickness, as in relation to your pa, and then the sorts of vital questions that come up from deep inside to resolve the situation, and also to oversee the healing, to observe the healing.
Yes.
Amazing. So as you move forward as a medic with this very awakened consciousness, did you discover challenges between what you were feeling vibrationally, intuitively, and the world of science? Sorry to be so literal, but...
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I have huge boxes of legal documents from the 8 lawsuits that I had beginning very, very early. When I was a third-year resident, I had my first lawsuit. And it's just because everyone in the room is named. It's not like I did anything, but I learned early on at a young age, my first Saturn return actually, that the lawsuits with doctors, they weren't about the truth. They were theater. And so I learned that, and I went every year. I had one or more lawsuits pending right up until, I don't know when the last one was, because once we got done with medicine, then I had them from my television shows on public television. Situations that you couldn't even believe in your wildest dreams. And then I think I finally worked through what a friend of mine calls the burning at the stake gene. Right. So, I mean, when Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom first came out in '94, I would wake up screaming. I was sure someone was in the house with a gun. My children can even tell you, they remember this. And then when I had to go into the hospital for the first time, see, I was on the cover of East West Journal. That was Michio Kushi's magazine way, way back. And I said to them, don't put me on the cover until after I've passed my oral boards in OBGYN. So I had passed them. Then I'm on the cover with my daughter on the banks of the Charles River back then. And it was an article about my approach to medicine. Nutrition was considered very, very, that was touchy business, very touchy. And what I did then, because I was, in the hospital with my colleagues, and I went to the food co-op and I bought every issue of East West Journal with my picture on the cover so that none of my colleagues would see it. But then when you have a mainstream book through Random House come out, you can't go buy all of them to make sure that no OBGYN in Portland, Maine sees the book. It was too late. I was always on eggshells, trying didn't Joseph Campbell said, the function of orthodoxy is to create martyrdom for mystics. And so it was like I was constantly trying to avoid martyrdom, Yeah, I think we're clear now. I think I'm through the eye of the needle.
Well, is that true? Because, as you speak, what occurs to me is, you were developing a pathway as a trailblazer for others to follow.
Yes.
And thereby you would receive a tremendous amount of psychic deprivation, which would
Yes.
be rationalized or literalized because of the way that people think within establishment. But at the same time, it seems consanguinely that what's happening is you are sorting out a karmic journey.
Big time, yes.
Where, although it was peaked and really painful, there you were being able to express whatever element you needed to express or expiate, atone in relation to the past, which was obviously to do with profound suffering, because here again, suffering was coming up. I mean, you know, it's an extraordinary story that you tell, and of course paralleled by so many other great innovators within this field at this time. But was there, as you moved along the path and resolved or atoned the karma, were there particular messages that came through that may be useful for our audience today? I learned this, that were real indicators or signposts on the road of life.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the body is biosymbolic. So I always knew that if I were going to be teaching this, I had to live it. So when I had my very first reading with Carolyn Mace, I had just left a conventional practice. And because I had two little kids and I couldn't figure out a way back then to see my children and still practice in a surgical field. And Carolyn told me that at the time I was leaving, I had in my etheric body developed a big ovarian tumor. And that if I had stayed, that would have shown itself. And then later on, right after Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom came out, I developed a small fibroid. And I knew that fibroid tumors, those are benign tumors, 40% of the women have them in the uterus, and they are related to pouring your life energy into a dead end job or relationship or creativity that isn't birthed yet. And I once got on the stage in New York City, went down to give a lecture. I hop on the stage because the plane was delayed. And I say, I have a fibroid that's as big as my husband's head. And when I finally got tired of the hundreds of acupuncture treatments and every diet known to humanity, and I got tired of dressing around it. And I finally said, oh, what are you doing? You know plenty of good surgeons and you trust them and you're your surgeon yourself. So just ask for help, will you please? So I go to Robert Hunt, who I just adored, the late Robert Hunt. And he always said, that he always repaired the pelvis so that when you were done, you had everything that you started with, but without the pathology. So I went to him. And when I went under anesthesia, then I said the healing statement. I asked the anesthesiologist to say to me, and when I awaken, the pattern that created this will be gone. And then I say, and 2 years later, I was a single woman. So I want to be very clear about this. This was not something for which I blame the man who was my husband. It was the way I was living was that I had created two lives. I had my professional life, but if you look astrologically at my chart, I have the Sun conjunct Neptune, conjunct Mercury, conjunct the South Node in the 4th house, with my North Node on the 10th house cusp in Aries. What that means in plain English is that I had lifetime after lifetime of being the little woman at home, keeping the peace. Family is everything. And in this lifetime, my soul said, no, you're going to go out there and you're going to tell the world everything that they need to know about what is going on home and family that is not working. And you're not going to be exempt from that. And I had to live my truth. I had had set up two worlds, my professional life and then my Mrs., so-and-so the third, and never the twain shall meet. It was almost like I had said to my husband, darling, let me go out and do my little women's health thing as long as this is all just fine. But when he started to be called Mr. Northrup, it was no longer working for him. And the day, the very first Oprah appearance, January of 1999, was the last day of my married life.
Wow.
Because it was almost like I could no longer contain who I had become, not from an ego standpoint, but because this was my soul work. And I couldn't make it okay for him. I just couldn't do it. And so this had to happen. But I must say, he provided me with a very solid platform of normalcy, of looking normal during that time. Now in where we are in history, I don't think any woman would have to worry about that at all. But I was one of the first group of women that went to medical school in any great number. Now, in my field, the majority of people are women. But when I went into OBGYN, I was told that was a specialty for the dumbest end of the class, and who would ever go into OBGYN? I'll never forget it. I'm at Dartmouth Medical School. Why don't you go into internal medicine? Just the stupid people go into OBGYN. And I remember thinking, wait a minute, OBGYN, the care of the next generation at the most formative, vulnerable time in our lives. And you think that's for the lower half of the class? That should be for the most revered part of the class. Just like, of course, our nursery school teachers, our preschool teachers should be the highest paid, and the university professors the lowest. So
again, it's an extraordinary statement, isn't it, about the societal reflection, or the male reflection, because the establishment of science was largely patriarchal, looking at the significance of that very deep atavistic right of privilege for the female, and how it had to be, the sacred nature of her had to be denounced. Yes. Thank you for your honesty. It's an extraordinary story, and I'm sure that it's, for those of you who are just joining, this is a conversation between Dr. Christiane Northrup and Stewart Pearce, and we're, really cavorting between that wonderful meeting ground today between science and metaphysics, or the physical and the metaphysical. As you reflect on the experience that you've just shared with us, I wondered if there were, because the story that you revealed is immensely personal, and that we know that when we move into the territory of the soul isn't necessarily involved in the story or the drama, but is reflecting on what I refer to as being the metaphors that bring us to the virtues or the graces of what our experience is all about, both as men and women. I wondered if there were particular indicators or signposts that you arrived at in resolution or atonement of the physical dis-ease and evidently the emotional reorientation.
Well, it's constant. It's like it's the onion keeps getting peeled, the next layer, the next layer, the next layer. And so I believe that when I wrote Mother-Daughter Wisdom, nearly went blind in my left eye. That's, was it the left eye? Yes. Right hemisphere, more connections to the body from the right hemisphere of the brain to the body. Left eye, things that I didn't want to see related to the mother. That was a whole story resolved with vitamin C, SEE, just like 2020 is the year of 2020 vision, things that we need to see that we haven't wanted to see. But I realized much, much later, only I would say in the last 2 years, why was this incredible moment of seeing a baby born and wanting to fall to the earth weeping, that was my personal story of wanting to bring love to where it hadn't been. That was my mother-daughter story. That was the rejection of the mother. So my deep, deep, deep grief was all related to my relationship with my mother, who to this day just doesn't know what to do with me. She said she wanted 6 boys and they all needed to be Olympic athletes. So she gets this little girl who likes fairies and playing the harp, and every time you put a number on me and enter me in a ski race, ski in the woods, I would win it if my sister fell, but she was an Olympian. And so it was the story. Okay, think about this. You come in as a soul, you choose exactly the parents who are going to provide the environment in which the soul has to do this work. And so I remember having a reading with Carolyn, and she said, your mother is like a mother superior. She is not the woman, she's not the mother you wanted, she's the mother you needed. Mm. And I think that that's absolutely true. I remember my parents saying to me early on, we noticed a tendency in you to want to sit by the fire and read books. Well, that's not okay. You got to put a backpack on, get out in the cold and climb a mountain. Well, what that did, that gave me the stamina, the physical stamina to go through a surgical residency, to go without sleep for days, to stay with the grieving process of losing a marriage, but always knowing that every one of these things has deep meaning. And if we can mine it for the meaning, then there's pure gold there. And I am no different from any of my patients, no different. And if I could find the gold there, so could they, so could they. And if you don't approach a physical condition in this way, to me, you lose all the depth, all the juiciness, all of the meaning, all of the stuff that makes life worth living. I mean, I started to dance tango because I needed to, in my body, learn how to receive the lead of a man or someone playing the masculine role, the yang role, because I had just become a very good man. I was asked when I started my residency, are you going to have a baby? And I looked and said, Dr. Mitchell, I'm not even having a dog. You can, you can count on me. I will be the best man you've ever seen, because I was told you will be taking the place of a man, the old stuff. And frankly, to this day, we have not figured out in Western society how to allow women to do their work and not sacrifice their position as mothers. We still don't know what to do with children. It's nuts. It's nuts.
Well, this is a huge program that comes up within the thesis that I've just committed myself to, which is the further understanding of the essence of Diana. Yeah. And that although she may have appeared to be the vessel of just pure unconditional love, and a rather fractured vessel, as we know. Yes. She began her ascendancy. By the time she went through so many different practices or modalities or healers, but by the time that we met, the last 2 years of her life, not that we knew this, that she was already beginning to feel the integration of all the varying awarenesses, such as those that you've been speaking in your own particular field, of her awarenesses, and how she could actually move into a situation where she would be able to bring about that vital healing. Now, we know that she didn't complete it because of our societal trace points, but now we're moving, as you say, into a very different field. And so I would love to invite you back to the Diana Heart Path that I want to create as a function of the book's awakening, which will be a series of workshops, a series of conferences, where we can literally hear from people like yourself and women like yourself about, okay, what do we need to do about this fracture? What do we need to do about the disalignment, so that we can once more create a pathway of endeavor that brings about a meeting point? It's very interesting because Artemis as a goddess, Diana as a goddess, was the patron of childbirth.
Ah,
Interesting. And
yeah.
and particularly in relation to the downtrodden, that she was actually a patroness of those who were plebeian. Isn't that interesting? And
Yes.
how we, as we know today, what we're doing is we're really honoring the dignity of labor of the people that serve us, that those perhaps were once considered to be the working classes or the plebeian classes, simply because they were exploring life in a much more atavistic or much more substantial and significant way than often those people who were being very Apollonian, you know, that they were more Dionysiac. So there's a huge pathway to bring about healing there. To take you on, I mean, I have so enjoyed, I wanted to wave this in front of everybody. I know you've written considerable text, but this I found so enlivening. It is absolutely fascinating. So anybody who is unaware of the goddesses never age, we're looking into these immensely archetypal points of significance, as Christiane was just saying about her own journey, but at the same time, the radical points of awareness that she arrived at as a result. For example, if I may comment, that although you were the introvert sitting by the fire reading your book, and you were then encouraged to put a backpack on and go and climb that mountain, as you were saying, what you developed was the warrior traits, which enabled you to get through with bravery and sustainment and courage through what you needed to do as a young medic and so forth, which I dare say has also helped you in the pioneering nature of your field.
Oh,
But of
yes.
course, if it was simply that, you would have just disappeared into the alpha domain of all of the ladies that were trying to assume a position of sovereignty. They're actually just, you know, et cetera, all of that stuff which we're very aware of. And of course, all the power dressing going back into the 80s and the early 90s was just as that was. And then was actually you were able to discover what it was to move into the Demeter, the mother role of having your own children, but also feeling a way of being able to help other young mothers to embrace the sensitive, embrace the deep measures of their being as they move through the physiological experience, but also the immense emotional awakenings that go with that.
That's right.
So I wondered if there was anything particularly significant about the goddess archetype that you had noticed in your journey, or that you would like to go on to creating as a blueprint for this wonderful arousal of the divine feminine through all of us, but I'm thinking particularly about the ladies at the moment, because I think the majority of you have been hard pressed by we men.
Well, what I really did with tango and with all of that is that was an initiation into Aphrodite and beauty and Venusian pleasures. I taught at the Mama Gina School of Womanly Arts in New York City, and did tango dances there to open up the various, you know, one of the things Regina Thomas Hauer was incredible evocateur of using the power of pleasure to have your way with the world. And she taught such practical ways of using one's female anatomy, female erotic anatomy, as a GPS, as it were, for whether you're moving towards something that is life-affirming or away from it. Now, this gets very tricky because in patriarchy and in the cabal and the dark forces, our sexuality has been hijacked as narcissistic supply, as it were, for the darker nature of the reptilians or the cabal or whatever you want to call them. But if you understand it as a superpower, if you understand that women's bodies are primarily erotic, if you understand that every time you see a scene in nature or anything that's life enhancing, and you measure blood flow to the vagina, it increases. It increases, so you can literally trust this part of your body. But with 1 in 3 women being raped or sexually abused in her lifetime, this enormous seat of power. One of my colleagues, she says that it is the space of the pelvic floor. She said that is your throne of pure gold. But it's, what do they say in the Course in Miracles? The holiest place on earth is where, whatever it is. I don't know. The Course in Miracles, I could never get through it. But this is that where it's been the biggest disappointments, the biggest heartbreak is, or it's the blood of the wound contains the healing. And so, as you might imagine, I'm board certified in the female erotic anatomy, but only as it about the pathology of that. I know everything that can go wrong with that. And that's why I decided, to make this part of my life, everything that can go right, and how to make that your experience. And women's erotic nature and women's sexuality is a pearl of great price, but not for the pleasure of men. It's for your pleasure. Then you invite men into it. And I learned something that was so profound from Steve Bodansky. He and his wife Vera wrote The Illustrated Guide to Extended Massive Orgasm, which I thought was a title I needed to have. And so I went to study with Vera and Steve, and he taught me that the male member, which we call in Tao is, the wand of light, is exquisitely sensitive to a woman's pleasure. A woman who is bathed in her own erotic well-being is what turns a man on. It's her being in her own pleasure. We're taught the opposite. All these stupid women's magazines, 20 ways to blow his mind in bed. No, what you find out is the thing that's blowing his mind is you being in your own pleasure, and his body responds to that. So I went to a men's night once where Regina teaches men all this stuff. And there was a guy in his 70s, and he said, ever since my wife started to take this course, I no longer need Viagra.
Wow.
Because it turned on woman. This is the turned on feminine life force is what lifts the whole thing. In men, the anatomy is what is the barometer. It's the barometer of that. But do you see how the narrative has been hijacked?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so the high point of what you're describing, and you enunciate this very beautifully, so to speak, in Goddesses Never Age, is the pleasure principle, and how the pleasure principle is a major beacon to move towards for sustainable well-being.
Yes.
And the pleasure principle is constantly being denunciated rather than aroused. And now it is time. And the way that you talk about it is so beautiful, because again, the erotic principle is to be reestablished as being a point of fundamental fertility, fundamental vitality, and thence fundamental well-being, rather than it being seen as a naughty thing or disgusting or whatever,
Yes.
Bedrock of all volatility.
Yeah, you can boil it down to, when mama ain't happy, nobody's happy, but happy wife, happy life. Yes. That's just the truth. And so, but we women, when you're one down in patriarchy, you're spending your whole life trying to make up for the fact that you're a woman. Yeah. So, as Ann Wilson Schaaf used to say, the fundamental sin of being born female is not redeemable by works. But frankly, I see the same thing in men. The feminine part of men that likes beauty, that likes the feminine is equally dismissed in patriarchy. I remember my father telling me in World War II, the British 8th Army were the most disgusting creatures on earth. He said, when men are not around women, they really deteriorate.
Yeah, and that thereby hangs a huge story. There's a fascinating question that's come through, but from Lisa, who is really celebrating your honesty. And she writes, have you ever regretted being so open and honest? There is context. 2 days ago, I admitted to my scientific family that I have only ever used homeopathy, re my children, for the last 18 years, the age of my eldest. They haven't yet replied to me, and I don't know if they will. So have you so I mean, anyway, there's a big family
I get it.
process
Listen,
going on there. Lisa, we'll talk about that afterwards. But have you ever regretted being beautifully honest?
One would think that I would regret it. Have I suffered the consequences? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Have I ever regretted it? No, because I can't do otherwise. That's the North Node in Aries. I can't not do it. And I have Pluto and Mars conjunct in Leo in the second house at 15 degrees Leo. I can't not do it. It's like, I know that this is my path, and something happens, particularly if I'm in front of a big audience, then I get more outrageous than ever. It's almost as though the gods come in and say, you've got to go for it. And I've seen my assistant, Diane, we've worked together for 41 years, and I've seen her sitting in the audience thinking, oh God, she's going to go there. She is going to go there. And then, of course, I must. So what I would like to do for Lisa and everyone else there is empower them to own their truth, knowing full well that it will have consequences. I believe we're in a time of enormous separating of the wheat from the chaff. And we're finding soul families that we didn't even know were there. And so many people now, they're isolated, and they find that if they say one thing, like, oh, I'm using vitamin D or vitamin C, or you're using any of the things that the minute I post them now on social media, they're censored. If you want to know the truth, just go where it's always being censored, on social media. And that's the mainstream consciousness. That's the psyop that's been going on, as far as I can tell, for 5,000 years. It's just, but really going on in the last 100, where up is down and down is up. Just like I said, it is not, the book, if you want to really look at a book that tells the real tale, it's 50 Shades of Grey. I began to read the book, and one of the things I love about you and your work is using words beautifully is extraordinarily pleasurable. So that book was so poorly written that I thought, I can't even read this because it is so poorly edited. And they're trying to get at the power of pleasure, but they're doing it they're tapping into this erotic life of women that we haven't even begun to explore in a way that uplifts everybody. And again, they've hijacked that program. Will we suffer if we're honest? Initially, yes. That's why people need to listen to programs like yours, the work that I do, so that you understand you're not alone. The other thing I've found is the more personal I become, the more universal the message is, because we're brought up with this myth of terminal uniqueness. No one has ever had this feeling. I mean, after I went through my divorce, my goal in life, work was always easy. That's fine. But I wanted to become the kind of woman that the kind of man I wanted would be interested in. And my daughter says to me, yeah, Mom, you are the only woman on the planet who's ever felt this way.
It is a Renaissance ideal. That you were reaching into the divine blueprint of that Renaissance ideal.
Yeah.
I guess that in just moving or elevating what we're suggesting into the realm of the goddess, and how, of course, goddesses never die. What we're really talking about is the fact that their viewpoints or credentials or keys indeed, whereby we can link into our own consciousness. So if we're actually living all the varying aspects of the goddess or the god, then we are moving in the direction of what the ancients call, well, not so ancients, I mean, going back into the Italian Renaissance, that time of immense change, that's what Leonardo da Vinci was actually teaching.
Yes.
So maybe what we need to do is to formalize this, not in any over-reductionist or overly rationalized way, but just simply in common sense terms, so that people can grab hold of, what I'm looking at, you see, is that, as I know you are, that we're seeing societal chaos, the like unto which we have not seen before, because
Right.
we now know it's global. It's not just nationhood chaos, it's
That's right.
global. And so you've already mentioned, if we can be honest, knowing full well that the shit is going to hit the fan, but knowing full well that this is going to happen, if we are constantly aware of the process of our own love, and that we're doing this not to project our bile onto a situation that we felt challenged by all our lives, but actually because we want to bring greater light and greater love to the fore, then automatically we bring in a healing unguent that allows the pathway of true justice to occur. And as a result of that, we are always seen to be redeemed. I mean, I thought it was fascinating, you know, when you're in this wonderful book, Goddesses Never Age, that study, you write of it at the very beginning of the book, which was done, I think, in the early 80s or the mid 80s by the University of Minnesota. I don't know which department, and how they were, what's the right word? Not investigating, but researching nundom. And can you tell the story? Can you remember that section?
Yes, it's a great story. This was a very famous nun study where here's what they did. They had a convent in Mankato where women came at the age of 17, 18, 19 to become nuns. And at that time, they had to write a narrative of their lives, which they kept on file. And then the researcher decided he was going to study the brains of those who died to see what happened during Alzheimer's disease. Now, here's what they did that was so fascinating. They found that the nuns with the most idea density, that's some kind of linguistic term, at the age of 17, 18, were the least likely to be demented in later life. And when they did the autopsy studies, their brains did not have less in the way of amyloid plaques and arteriosclerosis. So it was almost like if you look at a radio, you won't find Beethoven in there. So, and so we always think that if you look at the physical vehicle, you'll find the reason for why thus and such happened, but so many times the soul overrides it. In the same way that a mother, if her child is stuck under a car, a mother finds this extraordinary strength to push the car off the child. You know, so that study has sort of been lost in the, so many of them that don't fit the paradigm are lost. Because that study that was then bound into, into a book, I believe it was a bestseller at the time, was all about we know now, for instance, we did not know it then, that the hippocampus, the area of the brain where we have memory, continues to add cells throughout our entire lives. And then, of course, there's the very famous neuro study of London cab drivers who actually have to work for about 2 to 3 years to memorize every single street. And the hippocampus in those people expands dramatically on MRI.
Knowledge.
Yeah, knowledge.
Isn't that interesting? It's
the
called
knowledge.
The knowledge.
The knowledge. Yes, yes. I wish we had that in New York. I mean, those guys, I mean, they're not looking at the road, they're looking at the GPS. You're, asking the angels to please be in the cab because the driver isn't.
So how do we stimulate our hippocampus? I want to get into nitric oxide and, of course, get back to vitamin C, because I thought that was extraordinary, the way that you cured the cornea displacement in your left eye as a result of vitamin C.
Right. Okay, well,
so, yes, how do we stimulate our hippocampus?
Just by learning new things.
Right.
Always, and here's the thing. You will never learn anything new unless there's a little discomfort associated with it. Mm-hmm. So when I went in to learn tango, that was harder than medical school. It was harder than anything I've ever done. Why? Because of the cultural context. I go in there, nobody cares that I'm a New York Times bestseller. I'm just another middle-aged woman who wants to learn how to dance. And there aren't enough leaders, and there's a whole bunch of us, and everyone's bitching because no one's asking them to dance. And I thought, okay, I have to figure this one out. And I got to stand right at the front and smile until I become, because I'm not 20 with long legs. If you're 20 with long legs, it doesn't matter if you have 2 left feet. Everyone will dance with you. I'm not going to override biological programming either. I'm going to have to do this on the merits of my personality. And it worked, but it took a while. And many, many times I did not want to drive into the city alone at night and park my car and just go get it done. But I realized it was like med school. My dad said to me when I was trying to decide what to do, he said, hey, at the end of 4 years, you got to be something. You might as well have an MD after your name. It's like, okay, at the end of 4 years, I'll be somewhere. I might as well know how to dance tango. So it's like that. You have to have, I remember Carolyn Mace talking about that people who have more wishbone than backbone. Mm. There is a time you have to actually decide to do something that's going to be not comfortable. But I developed that will on the trail with my mother, Edna, and the backpack. Don't ask for a lighter pack, ask for a stronger back. There's an enormous amount of wisdom in that, where you just get up and you do it. So you learn new things, learning a language, the knowledge, go over to London, be a cab driver. Good luck with that. Anything like that, where you decide there's something you've always wanted to do. Right now, we're in a global pause. We're in a pause, or as the astrologer Ann Ortley said, we've all gone into a cocoon. The butterfly will come out when the Pluto transit ends around December 21st. You don't know what you're going to look like. So this is a pause where anything you've always said you wanted to do. I bought the piano guys piano course because they would teach you how to play by ear using chords. I took years and years and years of lessons. Can I just sit down and play the piano? No, that's stupid. Now I can use the time to do it. And that will increase the hippocampus. The other thing that happens with increasing age, as Mario Martinez says, growing older is the opportunity to increase your value and competence. But it won't do that if you start to believe the rhetoric that, at this age, it's too late and I can't. And that's just going to be deadening. He studied 700 healthy centenarians all over the world. They're future oriented. You ask them, that's a beautiful garden you have. They're 102. They go, you should see it in a couple of years. They're, they're like that. So the brain architecture continues to change, and our associative cortex, the dendrites, make connections that no 20-year-old has. So when I'm talking to you and you're talking to me, the depth of our knowledge, we can go and we can grab a fact, or the Minneapolis Mankato study. And I have a friend who knew the nunnery there, and he's a holistic doctor in Mankato. We've got all of that to draw on. And so that's increasing your value and competence. But what you must do, and this is why the term goddesses never age. I got that from Doris Cohen. I was working with her with dream work. And again, I was very concerned, like we're taught in patriarchy, that at my age, all the men wanted someone 20 years younger and I would be single for the rest of my life. And all these lies that we're told that are not true. And she says to me on the phone in her inimitable accent, she speaks 7 languages, and she'd go, my dear, goddesses never age. And I thought, that's a good title. Then I ran it by the people in New York at Random House. They said, oh no, that's really going to offend a lot of people. Why don't you just call it Real Women Never Age? And I said, this plays well in the Midwest. I'm going to stick with it.
Oh, wow. Well, anyway, yes, there's a huge discussion over that.
It is.
Again, at this time of extraordinary reckoning,
Yeah.
you know, there was a wonderful poem written by Christopher Fry, or rather inserted into one of his plays, called Sleep of the Prisoners, which he wrote in the 30s, but it could have been writing today. You know, thank God our time is now, when wrong comes up at every turn, never to lead us, till we take the longest stride of soul we humans ever took. It takes thousands of years to wake, but will you wake for pity's sake? Which sums up this journey for me, in relation to the metaphoric consciousness. Of course, we know that those simple thoughts can be explosive and then lead us into a myriad of other intellectual thoughts, or cerebralization, rationalization. But it's coming back to the fact that we know that we're on the brink, on the portal of something very extraordinary, about a new level of living. And the global pause, as you say, for me, gives me an opportunity to really hunker down, as you guys would say, into a deep listening, because I feel that the divine lives within the stillness, not necessarily within the action, although action can become, of course, divine, particularly when we apply beauty as an emanation of the divine. But actually that she's saying something radical to us about what the next step or what the next move will be within the stillness. And the more we can go into the stillness and listen, then we're going to hear a completely different chord, and the old song lines will open. So the mysteries will come flooding out. You know, I feel life is really a question of remembering. You know, that, wait a minute, I knew that, but I needed to remember. And of course, I feel, but apropos our conversation, and I'm just sort of creating arcs because I know that we're moving, unfortunately, it's nearly time for us to complete. And I want to see if there are any more questions. Everybody's celebrating your wonderful honesty. Christiane is a beacon for authenticity and honesty. And suddenly the scrolling mechanism jerked and I lost it. And so many wonderful questions. Okay, if I may, just very quickly, because I really want to tend to your questions, but I need to ask Christiane permission for something. When glaring questions come through that you and I feel are of import in relation to really stepping forward or striding, the soul stride forward, may I come back to you? I know you're an extremely busy lady, but may I come back to you if there's any point of illumination that people want? And then I can broadcast them generally. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
I promise you I will not flood you, because I know what I've just said means, in the sense that I know what it's, you know, I have, like you probably, I have 5 books waiting for people who have just written books. They want me to write prefaces, you know, and it's so wonderful that these books have come through, but I'm thinking, oh my goodness, when am I going to read them?
Yes, I know. I know.
However, so if I may, that would be absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Let me just quickly, I would love, do you have another moment or two?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, yes.
Because I would love, as we're talking about global pause, I would love to touch on the corona pandemic. And from the viewpoint of it as an archetypal witness, meaning that what I find so fascinating about the pandemic, and incidentally, although we haven't discussed it, I've been at the battlefront with 2 of my clients who are both consultant virologists, manning teams in large London hospitals. You know, so I've been battling up with my masking and going in and shadowing them and helping them intuitively. What we faced, I should say, was this extraordinary effect that the virus has on the pneuma of the dear people that are, and that they're mostly people that have never, ever thought about the health of their beings, particularly of their lungs. And that, you know, I was only thinking of this whilst, you know, post-operative discussions were taking place, as it were, of how this was the same with the HIV virus. Automatically, and I just wondered if you had an overriding macroscopic comment on the whole substance of corona and what it's teaching us, apart from getting into conspiracy, you know.
Right. Well, it's certainly teaching us that we cannot anymore rely on outer authority alone. We must bring in our own authority, which has been my whole career, is seeing things that no one else saw at the time. Like doing all of these episiotomies for birth. Why did we need to do that? And, circumcisions, I did hundreds. I have apologized to all the baby boys and are trying to prevent as many as I can now. But at the time, when you know something, but you're ahead of the time, then the mainstream has to catch up. It's now almost as though the planet herself in her ascension has said, time's up, time's up. I was transfixed by the Harvey Weinstein story, because in October of 2017, when that hit, I sat there and I said, this is what I have been saying since the 1980s, but everyone thought my patients were crazy. And my colleagues would say, I only see normal people. So I think that what we're going to see is a renaissance of soil regeneration. Zach Bush is one of my heroes. We have got to do regenerative soil. We can no longer live with polluted air, polluted water, and a polluted body. We need to have our governments work for us, not for big corporations. It is, I think it is we the people of the planet Earth are not having it anymore. Like your London guy who I adore, who calls himself Deep Divers, Ralph Smart. Ralph does a wonderful podcast on YouTube. And I believe that this is the time. It's been foretold, as you know, in astrologic terms in the Mayan calendar. We call it the Great Awakening. For me, that's an astrologic term. For others, it's a political term. Whatever way you see it, no one's getting out of this without deep transformation. And then also, it's a time of, as you know, every alcoholic family system you've ever worked with works through triangulation. Would you two talk? I'm mad at Dad, but will you talk to him? No, you talk to him directly. We are doing that to each other. These divisions, we cannot stand divided this way. But I believe that there are powers that be that are just dividing people. And we need to look beyond that. And as you have said, the language of the heart. The heart never divides. It always brings it together. The day of the left hemisphere running everything is not going to work. We have to bring in the body. We need to bring in the soil. We need to bring in the trees, the angels, the divas, the fairies. Everything needs to come together now. And I believe what I'm seeing is that there's a great awakening in so many people. There are many who are still, they don't see it. They think it's just a virus. It's way more than that. You don't get something that is a planetary situation like this. It's a gigantic rebirth.
And so as we see the Gaia on which we live moving through its own gestation process, because it's pretty obvious, astrologically speaking, that a cosmic cycle has come to a point of completion. Yes. And now we're beginning a new cosmic cycle. And so, of course, all of our cells are alerted. And it seems that one of the prime, or the main themes, I should say, is the awakening of releasing the bound nature of our 3D credentials, so that we can begin to see that we're really super beings. And that we're, of course, using the rather cliched term today, that we're spiritual beings having a human experience, and that we need to wake up to the extraordinary opportunity and cease being fearful. This is really what we're saying, isn't it? We need to take more vitamin C so that we see clearly. And yes. Obviously, we're not talking about ODing. Well, if you were to, as a medic, if you were to say, for a healthy body moving through the cascading nature of this period, how many milligrams do we need to take a day? Vitamin C?
2 to 5,000.
Right.
2 to 5,000. And if it's liposomal, that's more absorbable. So maybe 2,000. Basic ascorbic acid is very interesting because when you reach tissue saturation, you have loose stools. So you always can titrate it. So you just want to stay below tissue saturation. What's interesting is one mosquito bite can lower your vitamin C for the whole day. One cigarette will wipe out all of your vitamin C. So it's very, it depends on your lifestyle. More people need magnesium. I would say everyone is deficient in magnesium. At this time, you can get that with an Epsom salt bath, which I do every night, a couple cups of magnesium sulfate. That's Epsom salt or transdermal magnesium. Zinc is important. My friend Belinda Womack calls zinc. She said that's ruled by Archangel Zadkiel. That is that's about Pluto. That's about transformation. And we know with the virus, it is attacking the ACE receptors in the lung. But if you have enough zinc on board, you want to prevent the cytokine storm. That's what's killing people. And you don't want to wait until you're sick. You want to back it all up with a vitamin D, the divine vitamin from the sun, vitamin C, see it clearly, zinc, transformation. Those three things, and then we can, dick around with some other stuff. Vitamin A is good, and, iodine is important. But the three biggies, I would say zinc, D, and C.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
This has been absolutely wonderful. I know that we could go on for another hour or two and develop a symposium, but I just want to thank you so much for this generosity of you giving your time and your energy and your expert wisdom. It's been wonderful sharing with you, and I would love to invite you back at another opportunity.
Yes, we'll do it. That would be wonderful.
Be absolutely wonderful. And for all you people listening in, I know that you've, hallelujah, says Carol. I know that you've been, leaving all sorts of wonderful comments, which is difficult to see because the scrolling mechanism keeps jerking. However, thank you for being here. And, you've heard Christiane saying that she will be open, and of course I will vet all the comments so that we're not dealing with repetitions or whatever. Please find her at drnorthrup.com. So you're missing out Christiane's first name, and they're all saying you're wonderful and we love you and thank you. So you're much appreciated. I hope that the pleasure principle is glowing to such an extent through your whole being that you're producing so much serotonin and oxytocin today that you will dance a great tango for the rest of the day.
Absolutely. Okay, great.
Best to you and much love. Thank you so much.
Thank you.